All right, here's the tutorial y'all have been waiting for on how I make these cute little frogs with the little booties. Some have the crazy long arms, and I have been making some that have these four little bobble stitches as feet. They sit quite cute, still have the little booty, and I'm just gonna get right into it. So for these frogs, I've been using the Big Twist Posh, but you can use any kind of bulky yarn, or you can even use a worsted weight acrylic yarn. The pattern will work up nicely with either. I have dogs, okay? They're barking for some reason, but I'm using a 5mm hook, and I have been putting off recording this because of my dogs and children, and it is a little after midnight right now, but I'm still doing it for y'all. We're gonna start with a slip knot on the hook. Make a magic circle. I do mine by turning my tail into a counterclockwise circle, and I crochet right into it. We're going to start with 6 single crochets in the magic circle. Now, because I like my eyes to be even and placed on the same row, I actually will be slip stitching and then chaining 1 to start the next row for the entire pattern. I will not be working in the round in continuous rounds, because then that makes the rows shift, and I want the eyes to be even. I want both sides to be equal. So for the next row, we are going to do a single crochet and then an increase in the next stitch all the way around, which will give us 9 stitches. So I'm going to do that. I also have to say at the end, whenever I slip stitch, I always pull my yarn tight so that it doesn't appear like a wider gap, and it closes that up to equal just the 1 stitch at the end. Chain up. Our third row is going to have 2 single crochets and then an increase all the way around to equal 12. So there's my first 2, and then an increase, which is just 2 single crochets in the same spot. I'm just going to repeat that until I get back to the end. At the end of that row, I did slip stitch and then chain 1, and for this next row, I'm just going to put 1 single crochet in each stitch around to equal 12 all the way around. And at the end of that row, I'm going to slip stitch, but I'm not going to chain 1. I'm just going to simply pull that loop up, and then I'm going to cut my yarn tail, but I'm going to leave a little length. I'd say, yeah, maybe like 6 to 8 inches, enough for you to sew with later. So I'm just going to pull that loop out, pull it tight, and that is my first eye. And we're going to do that same thing for the second eye, except we're not going to fasten off after that first row of 12 around. Okay, I just finished the 12 single crochets around on the 4th row of my second eye, and I did not chain 1 to end. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my first eye and the end of my hook, and I'm going to go into the, not where the tie off was, the fasten off, but the next stitch over. I'm going to stick my hook in, grab my working yarn, and I'm going to, from here, slip stitch, chain 1, and then start my single crochets around like so. So there's this beginning of my new round of putting the 2 eyes together. So there's going to be 12 single crochets in this first eye, but I'm going to show you at the end, 3, 4, we're going to do something different. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then it looks as though we have 2 stitches left to get to the second eye, but that's just because of the slip stitch. So we're going to do a decrease right there, and make sure that your yarn tail just kind of stays out of the way, right into the center. And we're going to do a decrease, and I do it this way because it's going to be in the middle of the eyes. So just do a regular decrease, not an invisible one. I grab 1 loop in the first stitch, 1 loop in the next stitch, yarn over, complete that stitch, and that makes the 12th stitch on the first eye. Now the next eye, we're going to start with a decrease just that same way, and you can see where they connect right there, we're gonna go right there into that same spot so that we have a smaller hole to have to sew up that will inevitably happen from the way that we're joining. So we're doing a decrease there. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Get those tails out of the way. Oops. 10, 11, and 12. And then we're going to slip stitch to the top of the first stitch, chain 1. And that is the end of our 5th round when we join the eyes together. And as you can see, there might be little gaps or little holes in the middle there, and that's what we use the yarn tail for, from the first fasten off eye to sew that shut so there's no holes. So from here, for the next row, we're going to do 3 single crochets and then an increase all the way around to equal 30 stitches. So we just go right into that same stitch where we chained up from and do 1, 2, 3, and then an increase, and we're just going to repeat that all the way around until we get to 30 stitches. And at the end, once we reach 30 stitches, we're going to slip stitch, chain 1, and I just kind of loosen up my yarn a little bit so that I can go ahead and pick out my safety eyes to add right here. Okay, so I'm actually using these like sinker eyes with the rounded back. So because they like sink into the plush like that instead of sitting on top like this, I'm going to actually go a little bit higher than what I normally would on the plush, because when they sink in, they kind of go down a little bit. So I'm gonna go, there's the first row, there's the second row. I'm gonna go into the middle of the second, like right below the second row, in between the second and third row. And I'm just gonna center it. And then I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side and decide how I'm going to put my eyes. I kind of like this kind of silly look. And from here, I'm going to actually just turn the eyes inside out completely, like so. And then put the backs on. And then this is not sturdy enough, so I'm going to pull out my safety eye tool from Mom's Naughty Habit. So I have to use this on the, when I use big twists, because it doesn't stay on. They don't stay on. You didn't hear the click as much because of the round backs, but now they're stuck in there. And from here, I'm just going to turn them back right side out. And from here, you can take all your little tails and stuff them in behind the eyes, and you're good to go. You're going to add stuffing later anyway, but that's just to get them out of your way. So see how now the eyes are centered because I went a little higher up. And from here, I'm going to put my hook back on my yarn, and I'm going to do a few rows of 30 single crochets around. Now this is the part where you get to use your own imagination and your own discretion of how many rows do you want to do. This one, I just did a few rows of 30 single crochet. It looks like I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Looks like I did 6 rows of 30. And then on this one, I actually did only 3 rows of 30, and then I did 3 rows of 36. I increased to make its belly stick out a little bit more. It's up to you if you want to do that or not. I'm just going to go ahead and do 6 or 5, depending on how big I want it, rows of 30 single crochet. I forgot to mention that you only want to do continuous rows of 30 single crochet from here if you're going to be doing the bobble stitches as feet. But since most of the frogs I've been doing have been the crazy arm ones, I'm going to do that one. So I'm actually going to do just 2 rows of 30 single crochet, and then I'm going to show you how I add the long arms. I also need to remind you that we are still doing the slip stitch and chain 1 at the end of every row, because we also want the arms and legs to be even on each side. So I just did the 2 rows of 30 single crochet, and I think that this is a good length for where I want to start adding my first arms, or my top arms, legs, whatever, frog legs. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 is a good spot because I'm just lining it up with like the middle of the eyes. It might be more, or it might be less for you. Just be conscious of where your eyes are, like the actual bigger part of it. So I'm going to go on the side of the eye, which for me was 9 stitches, and I'm going to chain 15. Okay, I have my 15 chain, and I'm going to skip the first loop, and I'm going to slip stitch into the second loop from my hook, and then I'm going to chain 2 and do that same thing again. Skip the first one, go into the second one and do a slip stitch. I'm going to do that one more time, chain 2, slip stitch in the second loop from the hook, and then I'm going to slip stitch into the back of the first finger. And then from here, I'm going to slip stitch back down the arm like so, go into the next loop and slip stitch all the way to the base. So that should be 13 slip stitches, and then we're going to not go back into where we chained up from. We're going to start single crocheting in the next one over until we get to the opposite side of the frog, where we're going to do the next arm. So for me, it was 14 single crochets in between before I'm doing the next arm. And I'm going to do the same thing again, chain 15. And we're going to skip the first loop on the hook and go into the second one. Do a slip stitch, chain 2, do the same thing again. Skip the first loop on the hook, slip stitch into the second on the chain 2 again, slip stitch again, and then slip stitch into the back of the first chain where we slip stitched down to make the first finger. And again, do 13 slip stitches down the chain to the base of the frog. I got back down to the base. I started with my single crochets. I've done 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and then I'm going to slip stitch and chain 1 to start my next row. And this time we're going to go around the arm, but we're going to count and make sure that we still have 30 stitches. So I'll show you what I do whenever I get there. All right, so it's a little easier to see on this yarn, so I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I've just done 8 single crochets. Here's my 9th one, and you can tell that it's a stitch because you can actually like spread your work apart and you can see there's a stitch there and there's a stitch there. This right here is not a stitch, right? That's where the chain was and where the slip stitches were. So I just went into the 9th stitch, and we're going to go around the leg into the 10th stitch to go around the leg, and that is how you single crochet and make sure you still have 30 stitches all the way around. So there's the end of row 10. For row 11, we're just going to do 30 single crochets all the way around, and then come back and slip stitch and chain 1 again. And for row 13, I think, or the next row, we're just going to do another round of 30 stitches. Okay, so this is where your own discretion is going to come in handy again of how you want your frog to be shaped. And I lied, I didn't do another round of 30 for this next row. What I decided to do was go ahead and do my second row of legs. So I've done 14. I've done 14 single crochets, and on the 14th it looks to be lined up pretty close to the center of the eyes. I'm going to go ahead and do another set of legs, or another leg. So I'm going to chain 15 and do the feet all over again. So in case you forgot already and don't want to rewind, I chained 15 and then I slip stitched into the second loop from the hook, chain 2, slip stitch in the second loop from the hook, chain 2, slip stitch in the second loop from the hook, slip stitch behind the first toe or finger, and then slip stitch 13 back down. And now I'm going to single crochet until I get to the middle of the other eye. So for me, there's 1, and I think 6 will do it. And then I'm going to go ahead and do another leg where I chain 15, do the toes, come back down. And now I'm just going to single crochet back around to finish this row. Okay, I slip stitched, chain 1, and now we're going to do a decrease row. So for this one, we're going to do 3 single crochets and then a decrease all the way around. And I'll show you how I do it around the legs if you need any help with that. Otherwise, just do it how you normally would. So there's 1, 2, 3, and I'm doing invisible decreases here because I want to. 1, 2, 3, invisible decrease. So I'm going to go into the front loop of this stitch, go around the leg, and then into the front loop of the next stitch. Grab my loop, go through both loops, yarn over, finish the single crochet, and then do that all the way around. So again, it's 3 single crochets and then a decrease all the way around until we get to the end. Okay, and you've probably guessed by now, but we are starting to close up the bottom. So this next row is going to be 2 single crochets and then a decrease all the way around. And after this round or row is when I'm going to start stuffing it. I'm just using some Fluffy Fluff polyfill stuffing, and you want to make sure you stuff it fully, but don't over stuff it unless you want it to have a very large badonkadonk, okay? Make sure you also put some of the stuffing behind the eyes and fill up the little eye spots and just push it down in there. And then this next row, you're going to do a single crochet and a decrease all the way around. All right, we have 12 stitches here. We are going to decrease all the way around until we get 6 stitches left. So this is how I do it. I just slip stitch to the top of the first decrease, and I'm not going to chain 1. I'm just going to pull my yarn loop up. I'm going to leave a long enough tail to be able to create the booty crack, okay? So that being said, you don't need a whole lot, but I like to have too much rather than not enough. So this is about how long. I'd say maybe 1.5 feet to 2 feet of yarn tail, and just pull that tail all the way through that loop, pull it tight, and then grab your sewing needle. And this is how I like to close them up. I just fold my yarn tail in half, lace it onto my sewing needle, and I'm going to go into the front loops only, so the loops closest to me, kind of like whip stitching. Go in from the outside towards the center, and depending on your yarn you use, you might have to cinch as you go so that it doesn't break, like so. But this yarn's pretty tough, so I'm just going to keep going into the outside loops until I get all the way around, and then just cinch it closed like so. Now it's nice and closed, you can see here, and I'm going to go ahead and start making the booty. And now if you have a certain way that you like to do booties, you know what, that's all on you, and you can do it however your heart desires. This is how I do it. I go in through the hole, And I'm going to go quite a ways up. I usually go about 2 to 3 rows below the bottoms of the eyes. I just try my best to completely center it. Pull my yarn tail through, and then I pull it nice and tight. Make the butt crack form, and then go back into the center of the bottom and back out where we went through the first time. And I just do 2 to 3 runs like that, and just keep pulling tight as you go. Don't pull too tight and snap your yarn off. That's no fun for anyone, right? And then once you get it as scrumptious as you'd like, then I just hold everything nice and tight, grab a stitch on the bottom, and just tie a knot and weave in your yarn tail. Okay, and from here, this is where you can embroider your mouth and little blush cheeks if you'd like, or you can leave it just like this. It's cute with no mouth. You could do a long mouth, you could do a little tiny mouth. I've got about maybe like a foot of yarn that I want to do the smile with. I'm just going to enter from the back, exit through the front where I want my mouth to start. I'm going to pull my yarn tail until I have just enough left over to where I could tie it and knot with the other end once I'm finished. I'm going to do this one about this wide. I'm going to enter where I want it to end, and then back through the center so that I can anchor the smile down. Pull and adjust however you want it to be. Sometimes I like it to be like a little smirk, smile. Sometimes I want it more curved. This time I'm going to enter back where I pulled through for the anchor, but I'm going to exit where I began. Pull it tight. And I like this little smirk, so I'm going to keep it like that. Then from here, I'm going to just tie a knot, and then I'm going to cut the yarn tails and then stuff the knot into the back of the frog. And this one I'm not going to do blush, but you can do blush by just going in through the back, doing a couple loops, however many you want with whatever color yarn, to make the little blush cheek spots. This one I used some more Big Twist Posh, and on this one I used some neon acrylic worsted weight yarn, but this one I'm going to leave without the blush. And there you have your little cheeky frog. I hope that you enjoyed. If you want to know how to do the bobble stitches for the feet instead, you would just continue on until you get to the bottom. You decide where you want the feet to go, and I do 5 treble crochet bobbles and just keep going like I did this one. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and your new little cheeky frog.